In 1969, if you wanted luxury in a GM product, you were going to buy yourself a Cadillac. But if you wanted luxury and performance, well, the only way to go was the Buick. But in this case, the Skylark, the GS, the Grand Sport. Hi there, Rick DeBrule with another chapter in the automotive evolution here once again at the Martin Auto Museum, a great collection of more than 170 cars here in Phoenix that really spans the full automotive spectrum, all the eras from the very first automobiles ever built up to the formative years in the 30s and the 40s, the stylistic years of the 50s, and of course the muscle era, the 60s and the 70s. And that's exactly what this car right here, this 1969 Buick Skylark GS, represents. We'll talk more about this car in just a moment. But first, I need to make sure that you like and subscribe. And in the comments down below, let me know what I got right, what I got wrong, because there's always something we make a mistake on. And let me know your stories. Did you have a Buick like this one? Did you have a GS? Do you remember the drag strip days back in the late 60s and early 70s? If so, let me know down below. Now, before we talk too much about this 1969 model, I want to give a brief history about the Skylark name within the Buick world. The Skylark debuted in 1953 as a limited edition convertible to celebrate Buick's 50th anniversary. It was based on the Roadmaster, and the original Skylark was a stylish, high-end cruiser with a powerful V8, had wire wheels, had a cut-down belt line. They only made less than 1,700 of them, so they're very collectible today. And regular viewers of this YouTube channel might remember the profile I did of the 1954 Skylark that we have right here at the museum. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Now, after a brief hiatus, the Skylark name came back in 1961 as a compact Buick. By 1964, the Skylark had really become its own model, and it really helped Buick enter that hot mid-size market like the Chevelle. And the launch of the Grand Sport package, well, that turned the Skylark into a true muscle car competitor. Now, throughout the mid to late 60s, the Skylark started to grow in size and power, especially with the introduction of the GS 400 and the GS 350. By the end of the decade, when this car comes around, it's really a great blend of style and Buick refinement. In the 1970s, it evolved with the times, offering a little more comfort and luxury and moving away from the performance roots as the muscle cars were defining in the late 60s. The Skylark name, it did continue on in various forms through the 1980s and the 1990s, eventually becoming a compact front-wheel drive car aimed at economy and practicality rather than performance or even the luxury that original Skylark came out with back in 1953. All right, I want to take a moment to talk about these two letters right here. GS stood for Grand Sport. It was a concept that Buick actually kicked off back in 1965. It was the brand's answer to the growing muscle car craze. You know, at the time, Buick was seen as just kind of an upscale, comfort-focused GM brand. But you know what? They wanted in on the performance action that was beginning to dominate the scene. You know, cars like the Pontiac GTO and the Chevelle SS, both within the GM world. So they took the mid-size Skylark and they created the Skylark Grand Sport, dropping in a big 401 cubic inch nailhead V8 and giving it a slightly sportier look and feel. Now, the GS badge actually stuck around throughout the 60s, like this one right here, and into the 70s, eventually being used on other models like the Riviera and the Century. The original muscle car era GS nameplate, though, started to fade out in the mid-70s. Buick, however, did bring it back over the years, or at the very least the G part. Remember the turbocharged Regal Grand National, or the GNX? Later in the 90s and the 2000s, it would also represent some sportier trims. But it all started with that 1965 move to put Buick and prove that it had some muscle without losing its class. Let's take a walk around and look at the styling on this 1969 Buick Skylark, the GS Grand Sport Edition. It's important to point out that within the General Motors world, there were a number of cars that were built on the same platform. This was called the A-body platform that General Motors was using. In addition to putting the Skylark on it, they also built the Chevelle on this chassis. They also put the Pontiac GTO, for example, on this chassis. I believe it basically had a 112-inch wheelbase, which is what this Skylark has, which was the same thing, for example, I believe that the Chevelle was going to use and the Pontiac GTO as well. But in this version, this was longer as a Buick edition, it was about 200 inches, and I think when you compared it to the Chevelle, it was about 3 or 4 inches longer than the Chevelle. Of course, the Pontiac GTO, using the same platform, had a much sportier front end. Let's call this a more formal looking front end, because once again, this was designed to be a Buick. This wasn't designed to appeal to 22, 25-year-olds. This was designed to appeal to people in their 40s who wanted a little more performance and a little more style. Speaking of style, there's one important thing that Buick kept, and that's this right here. Notice this line and the way it sweeps down. Traditionally, this was a chrome strip and it was called a sweep spear. They kept the line right there and kept the indentation. On some of the other Buick models that year, you could get the actual chrome stripe. But in this particular one, all you get is the body styling on the side that gives you the impression of the sweep spear. By the way, one of the things this car has, and it's been added to it obviously at some point in time, are Cragar SS wheels. Now, if you remember the 1960s, the Cragar SS wheels were the way to go. I think these were introduced in 1964. Boy, they just took the world by storm because of their design and their style. Once again, this point coming in, the spoke coming in, going all the way to the center hub, actually made it stronger, which was great for drag racers as well. But from a styling perspective, boy, everybody loved this. Now, how many imitations have there been of that particular wheel over the years? But let's say a formal look, it would get a little sportier looking the next year when we get into the GSX, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But I love the convertible in this. I only wish we had the convertible down because, boy, that's the way to see this car and the way it was designed. Absolutely beautiful with that Grand Sport package. Let's take a look at the interior of our 1969 Buick Skylark, the GS Grand Sport Edition that we have here at the museum. And really, when you think about it, this was a combination of that classic muscle car styling together with Buick's trademark comfort and refinement. That's exactly what it had to be. Had a driver-focused perspective right here, you know, padded dashboard, the gauges, had that horizontal speedometer. And if you were, for example, were to buy yourself a Chevelle, you would get round gauges. Getting the horizontal one, well, that had a little more elegant feel to it. Bucket seats were optional on the 350, this car, although I think they were standard in the 400. Bench seat was standard. It would have come with vinyl upholstery, so this cloth upgrade is just a nice touch. By the way, one of the things I particularly love over here is the fact that they've got the Buick Skylark emblem embedded into the door. It's really nice. This car does not have the optional center console that would have come with the bucket seats. That was a really nice sporty touch. I also really like that iconic horseshoe shifter that they used to have. It was really great. I had plenty of comfort features. You know, it had air conditioning, power windows, tilt steering, AM, FM, although this particular one has an aftermarket radio. It was really trying to combine Buick's upscale image and a little performance. Cabin was roomy enough, you know, they had enough room in the back seat that I think you could call it generous. I think you could actually get legs in the back, which is not something every car could do with a back seat back in those days. It was really trying to find a proper balance between having a performance car, which is what the Grand Sport represented, and a Buick, which was, remember, just a notch below Cadillac from a luxury perspective. Trying to find a way to get those 40-somethings, the drivers who wanted a little more comfort, a little more luxury, and a little more performance, all at the same time. All right, time to talk about the engine in this particular car. This is the Buick 350 engine. It made its debut in 1968, and for 1969, it was a key part of the performance lineup for Buick's mid-size cars, including this car right here, the Skylark GS. The Buick 350 was a small block V8, and it was distinct from the other GM cars. I mean, unlike the Chevy, Olds, or Pontiac 350s, Buick actually designed its 350 independently from the other ones, and it had some pretty unique design characteristics. For example, it had a deep skirted block and relatively thin wall casting, which made it relatively light. And for 1969, the Skylark GS offered the 350 as standard, although you could bump up to the 400. The engine was available in two main configurations. There was the GS 350. This one produced about 280 horsepower with a 4-barrel carburetor. Pretty high compression. I think it was like 10.25 to 1. The optional engine, though, that was the GS 350 Stage 1. Not a lot of those were sold. It was rumored to have some other performance upgrades, so it was better in other ways, but don't know all the details of that. We do know more about the Stage 1s that were offered in 70 and on from that point. Now, this engine, to be honest with you, was overshadowed by the big block GS 400. And the 350 powered GS, really, it offered solid performance. It was lightweight, so it made for a nimble and a responsive car. And the engine had a reputation for being underrated and underappreciated. It was just the 350. It wasn't the stage one. It wasn't a 400. But it did its job. And really, it remained in production for Buick until 1980. They had various updates, they had emissions modifications, all kinds of things they did. And I think today it has a pretty loyal following among the Buick enthusiasts, especially those who are interested in the period-correct restorations. Now, you'll notice this one here at the museum does not have the original air cleaner in. It's kind of a shame. I like the look of that original air cleaner with that 350 sticker right here. But for the most part, it appears to be the original engine that this car came with. So, barring some minor changes to it, I think this is pretty much what it would have looked like when you bought it back in 1969. The 1969 Buick Skylark Grand Sport Edition really was never a huge seller. I mean, especially when you compare it to the Chevelle SS, the Pontiac GTO, the Plymouth Roadrunner, some of those cars. But once again, it achieved the goal. It took a car that some people wanted, the Buick, a little more upscale, and gave it a little more performance. Now, the next year, 1970, that's when they came out with the GSX. The GSX was this car on steroids in so many different ways. Not only did it have more performance under the hood with a 455 cubic inch engine, but it had a great look and appearance package that was added to it. That car was everything you wanted it to be. You could only get it in two colors, either yellow or white, and it wasn't cheap. I think the Grand Sport, the 455 package, was about $9,000. I think you had to add another $3,000 or $4,000 to get the GSX package. Now, not an awful lot of those sold, as you might imagine, so they're rare today. When they come up on the auction block, they get a lot of attention. But going back to 1969, when you look at this compared to some of the other cars out on the road, definitely was not a true performance car in terms of its looks, but it was not supposed to be. Had a more formal look, a little more elegant look. This 350, not a massive amount of performance, but enough to get you around. The 400 even more so. But if you wanted something a little more upscale and just a little bit of more performance at the same time, a little more look to it, get those bucket seats in there, well, then the Grand Sport was probably the way you were going to go back in 1969.